I was born in East Oakland in 1957, at a time when the world outside our small wooden house still seemed to be governed by rules written long before I took my first breath. Women were taught that our highest calling was marriage and motherhood, that education beyond the basics was wasted effort, and that a husband's word was law. In those days, California shone with the promise of sunshine and progress. But at home, the heat of summer only made the peeling paint on our front porch stickier, and my father's shouts as he counted his meager factory paycheck louder. My father rose before dawn to punch the time clock at a nearby plant. My mother spent her days scrubbing floors and polishing silverware in houses far grander than our own. Their hands were strong, but their eyes betrayed a weariness I couldn't yet name. I learned early that girls didn't need much schooling, just enough to read the Bible and check the grocery total. I loved books, stories, and numbers, but the nearest library was a stranger, its steps as forbidden to me as a nightclub. The world outside our block felt too big, too full of things a young woman like me had no business chasing. By the mid-1970s, America was beginning to stir. Women in San Francisco staged protests for equal pay. On television, I watched bold voices Steinem Friedan debate rights that had never occurred to someone like me. But that screen was black and white in our living room, a luxury my husband James allowed only because he loved to watch football. It was there I first glimpsed a horizon that didn't end at my husband's front gate. Before that, my horizon had been defined by the crease of our backyard fence, by the relentless hush James demanded of me, by the invisible lines beneath my ribs that kept me so small I could almost hide in his shadow. When I met James at a 4th of July barbecue, he seemed to walk out of an entirely different world. At 28, he wore his security guard uniform like armor, and compared to the young men I knew, he felt safe. He made me laugh. He sent me flowers. He promised to treasure me. My parents, proud of their industrious daughter, saw in his green eyes nothing but good fortune. But love isn't always what it seems. James's courtship came wrapped in compliments that later felt like chains. "You're perfect," he said. "Just mine." Only as I learned to measure the weight of his gaze did I realize that a compliment can be a claim, and a promise of protection can fasten a lock around your heart. In those early months of marriage, the signs were small. He checked the change when I brought home groceries. He asked about every phone call, every lingering look from a neighbor. He told me he worried for my safety, that the world out there was full of wolves. I believed him. After all, wasn't a husband who worried a loving husband. Every time I tried to speak up, he'd lean in close and say, "Trust me," baby words that pressed me back down into silence. The first time I recoiled from his touch, I assumed I was the one at fault. I was a girl who had been taught that obedience was a virtue, that submission was kindness. I never stopped to ask whether kindness should hurt. That small, stifling pattern of control, where worry became monitoring and protection but became imprisonment, is one shared by countless women. Statistically, nearly 1 in 3 American women will experience some form of intimate partner violence in her lifetime. The warning signs often begin subtly: partner isolation, financial control, emotional manipulation. Experts call this pattern the power and control wheel, a framework that identifies tactics such as coercion, intimidation, and gaslighting. Gaslighting is particularly insidious. It's when an abuser denies your experience, twists the truth, and makes you doubt your own mind. When James would insist that I'd never paid the bills on time, despite the stack of paid statements in my drawer, I began to believe him and to question my own memory. Most of us want to trust our partners. The idea that the person who loves us could also harm us feels impossible. A common mistake is to interpret control as concerned jealousy as proof of love. We confuse possessiveness for passion, ignoring the fact that love never thrives in a cage. In our culture, we've often romanticized the idea that a jealous partner cares too much or that a controlling spouse is simply protective. But protection that thwarts your freedom is no protection at all. It is the first bar of a prison. If there is one lesson I've learned, it's that awareness is the seed of liberation. Every young woman should learn to ask herself and her partner questions that cut through the syrupy promises. Do you ever get angry when I see my friends? Am I allowed to have money in my own name if I want to go back to school? Will you support or forbid me? These are not tests of loyalty. They are measures of respect. Any hesitation, any flinch at these questions is a red flag. In my case, the red flags were there all along, counting coins, controlling my comings and goings, diminishing my faith in my own judgment. But back then, I didn't have the vocabulary for toxic control, nor the courage to name it. What I had instead was a small, stubborn seed of doubt, watering itself in the dark. That seed began to sprout the first time I watched a woman on TV declare her right to autonomy. It strengthened when I secretly saved a few pennies from the grocery money, hiding them in a hole beneath the kitchen cabinet. It grew with every stolen moment I spent reading an article about women's studies at night under the dim glow of a lamp. And it blossomed in the presence of other women neighbors who whispered, "You're not alone," when they thought I wasn't listening. By opening our eyes to the reality of control, and by refusing to confuse it with care, we can protect not only ourselves, but the generations that follow. My daughter Marina, born in 1976, watched every moment of my confinement with wide, frightened eyes. I vowed then, in the hush of my despair, that I would find a way to give her what I had been denied: safety, without suffocation, love without ownership, and freedom without fear. When you look back on your own life, you'll likely see a path littered with small choices that either nudged you toward liberation or pushed you deeper into submission. Choosing to learn more about healthy boundaries, to vow inwardly that you deserve respect, to speak just one fearful truth aloud. These can be the pivot points on which your whole future turns. For me, that pivot came one April Sunday morning in 1987, when I opened the back door to an invitation from my neighbor Zoe to join her for tea. In her simple question, "How long has it been since you sat with friends and laughed?" I found my moment of clarity. It was the moment I decided I was worth more than the bars of my own home. No one escapes a life of control without first recognizing the patterns of abuse, naming them for what they are, and then making a plan, flawed though it may be, to reclaim autonomy. In part 2, we'll move from recognition to action, laying out practical steps to build a secret safety fund. Enlist a support network and create a detailed escape plan that maximizes your chances of success and minimizes the risks. Because once you see the bars of your cage, you can never unsee them, and once you resolve to step beyond them, there is no turning back. That April morning on Zoe's porch marked the end of my long silence and the beginning of my plan. I sat across from her with a cup of chamomile tea, and for the first time in 12 years, I felt seen as a woman, not merely a possession. I still remember the softness of her voice when she said, "You deserve laughter, Janet. You deserve choice." In that moment, I resolved that I would find a way out, not only for myself, but for Marina. I began with the pennies. Grocery money came in paper bags of small bills and loose change, just enough to cover milk, eggs, and bread. Each week, after James stormed off to poker night, I would slip 2 quarters and a few $1 bills into a folded scrap of paper. Under the kitchen cabinet's false bottom, I dug a tiny hole hidden by a sliver of plywood and a moth-eaten rag. The first time I dropped those coins in, my heart pounded so loudly I thought James would hear it through the floorboards. But each clink of metal was a heartbeat of hope. Even the smallest amounts, saved consistently, build into a real resource. $1 here, $2 there over months. You'll have enough for a bus ticket, a night at a motel, or a hot meal. Hiding money in obvious places under mattress in cookie jars invites discovery. Choose a clever spot and vary it, for example, inside an old shoebox at the back of a closet, or taped under a dresser drawer. I called it my Sunday circle. Zoe's invitation wasn't just for tea, it was an introduction to Mrs. Eleanor, Mary, Connie, and Susan, 6 women scattered through our East Oakland neighborhood, each with her own story of confinement or heartbreak. We met once a week in Zoe's sunlit living room, sharing pastries and half-whispered confessions. No minutes were taken, no records kept, just trust. Identify 1 or 2 neighbors, co-workers or church friends whose kindness you trust. Start with small conversations. Ask about a recipe. Borrow a book. Comment on the weather. Over time, you can gently share that you're going through difficulties and need someone to check on you. Blaming or shaming language. Instead of saying, "My husband locks me in," describe your feelings. "I feel trapped when I can't go out by myself." People respond more readily to emotion than accusation. In the months that followed, I managed to photocopy, without James ever noticing, my birth certificate, our marriage license, Marina's birth record, and my social security card. Each evening after dinner, I tucked a fresh copy into a manila envelope, labeling it simply important. The envelope traveled from my bedside caddy to Zoe's glove compartment, then under Mary's mattress when Zoe went away on business. At last, it rested with Susan, who kept it in her attic trunk. Checklist of must-haves: photo ID, driver's license or state ID, birth certificates, yours and your children's, social security cards, proof of residency, utility bill, lease agreement, medical records and prescriptions, bank account statements or checkbook, keys, house, car, mailbox. Tip: keep both paper and digital copies. Email encrypted scans to yourself or upload them to a secure cloud with a new password your partner wouldn't guess. I drew a map on lined notebook paper, my shaky handwriting tracing the path from our house to Zoe's next door, then to Mary's 2 blocks away, then to the bus stop on East 12th Street. I noted the bus number, its schedule, and the fare. I marked which friends would be home at what times, so I could avoid James' unpredictable poker returns. Step-by-step plan. Wait for James' poker night. Shake out my skirt and pocket a small scarf to hide my hair. Whisper to Marina, our code word Bluebird, and tell her to grab her backpack. Sneak out the back door, pausing at each landing to listen for footsteps. Slip into Zoe's house through the side gate. She'd leave a light on and the back door unlocked. Change into plain clothes and head to the bus stop with Susan's envelope of money and documents. Pitfall: overplanning. Every minute can lead to paralysis by analysis. Instead, prepare the essentials and accept that some details will change. Flexibility is your ally. I knew of safe houses through the women's movement posters, plastered in the church basement, even if James mocked my interest in those silly flyers. One sleepless night, I slipped out and called the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE. The woman on the other end spoke softly but firmly. "You're not alone. We have confidential shelters in Contra Costa Marin, and even here in Alameda County. Would you like me to help you find a place?" That conversation, conducted in hushed tones from the payphone at the corner market, was the lifeline I needed. I learned that shelters offer private rooms or dormitories, meals and clothing, counseling and support groups, legal advocacy, help obtaining restraining orders. I jotted down the nearest shelter's address and phone number on the back of a gum wrapper. I never dialed it from home. Instead, Zoe's sister Rachel kept the number ready for me to call once I set foot out the front gate. Tip: if you think you might need a safe house, memorize or write down its address in code. Aunt Roberta's place, and keep that somewhere only you and a trusted friend can find it. As spring turned to summer, I packed a small overnight bag, a change of clothes for me and Marina, a toothbrush, some cash. the manila envelope of documents, and a small stuffed rabbit of hers. I stashed it under a loose floorboard in the laundry room. Every few weeks, I slipped in fresh underwear and a couple of granola bars. This go bag was my ticket to freedom and insurance policy against panic. Essentials for a go bag: 2 days' worth of clothing, underwear, socks, shirt, pants, basic toiletries, toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, medications and prescriptions, cash in small bills, copies of IDs and key documents, a small comfort item for your child toy blanket, common mistake. Storing the bag too close to an exit. James regularly searched. Keep it in a spot you visit often, but not where he'll look. Vary its location if you can. I practiced the lie that I was heading to the pharmacy until I could utter it without sounding afraid. I taught Marina to play along. I have a headache, Daddy. I'll be back soon. Then we rehearsed the code word, bluebird, in whispers at night, so it felt natural when I had to use it. Confidence builder. Rehearse your exit strategy in your mind and out loud. Walk the path during daylight when no one's home. Familiarity breeds calm. Covert signals. Establish a simple code with your child. Perhaps 3 taps, a particular song humming, or a note slipped under the door to signal that danger is near or that you need to leave. All these pieces, coins, saved documents, copied friends, enlisted routes, mapped, came together one blistering July evening. James had fallen asleep on the couch after poker. His breathing was deep, steady. I lifted the floorboard, pulled out the bag, slipped on a loose dress and flat shoes, and wakened Marina with a gentle shake and a whisper. Bluebird, sweetheart. She blinked but nodded, clutching her rabbit. Hand in hand, we crept to the back door, hearts pounding, and stepped into the warm night air. As I closed the door behind us, I heard his snores deepen, oblivious to the world falling apart. In that instant, I realized freedom was not a distant dream, but a choice I had made and executed. The world beyond our yard was dark and uncertain, but for the first time in my life, it was mine to explore. From here, we boarded the bus toward downtown, where Zoe's sister waited with lights on and a hot meal. Behind us, the bars of my former prison grew small in the rear-view window. Ahead, the road to San Diego stretched out like a promise. In Part 3, we will journey through the perilous road to a new city. The challenges of rebuilding from scratch and the strategies that helped me transform fear into resilience. San Diego greeted us with a salty breeze that first morning as we stepped off the bus into the pale dawn light. My legs trembled, but Marina squeezed my hand and pointed toward a tidy bungalow 2 blocks away. Rachel's house painted a cheerful yellow. We crept up her front walk with our overnight bag between us, and when the door swung open, I felt a wave of relief so deep it stole my breath. Rachel ushered us inside without questions, guiding Marina to a bowl of cereal and pouring me black coffee. "You're safe here," she said, gently, pressing a cool hand to my forehead. In that small kitchen surrounded by walls that didn't creak with threat, I finally allowed my shoulders to drop. Those first days passed in a blur of neighbors' welcome baskets and whispered worries. Rachel's spare room became our world. A single bed shared by 2 travelers, a dresser stuffed with second-hand clothes, and a window that let in enough light to remind us of morning. Each day, I watched Marina's eyes grow brighter as she helped Mrs. Solis down the street with her groceries or raced neighborhood kids to the park. I, on the other hand, felt the weight of my own uncertainty. What could I do with no degree, no references, and a history I dared not mention? But necessity is a stern teacher. When Rachel suggested I try cleaning rooms at the nearby motel, I accepted, ashamed but determined. The first assignment left my hands raw from harsh disinfectant. The second made me question if I could stand upright the next day. Yet every dollar I earned, sometimes $25 for a deep clean, went into a small envelope hidden in my shoe. By week 3, I had enough to rent a single room above a laundromat downtown. It wasn't much bare walls, a lumpy mattress, a sink in the corner, but it was ours. On moving day, Marina helped me unpack a single cardboard box of clothes and toys. Watching her arrange her stuffed rabbit on the pillow, I understood that rebuilding our life would come in tiny, ordinary moments. Physical safety was only the first step. I discovered a women's resource centre on Market Street, a modest brick building with flyers promising support groups, legal aid, and counselling. I swallowed my pride and walked through its doors, heart pounding. Inside, I found a circle of chairs filled with women whose stories mirrored mine, beaten, controlled, silenced. When I introduced myself as Janet from Oakland, voices murmured in understanding. The weekly support group became my anchor. We learned to name our experiences: gaslighting, coercive control, isolation. We practiced grounding exercises, deep breathing, guided imagery to calm the tremors in our bodies. One evening, a counselor led us through a simple ritual, writing down our fears on slips of paper, then tearing them into pieces. As I shredded mine, fear of poverty, fear of being hunted, fear of unworthiness, I felt weight lift from my chest. Outside counselling hours, I found solace in small routines, walking Marina to school, studying library books on nutrition so I could cook healthy meals, volunteering at the local food pantry. Each act of service reminded me that my worth was measured not by James's approval, but by the help I could offer another struggling soul. One afternoon after work, I lingered over a flyer titled Adult High School Diploma Program. My fingers trembled as I tore it down. Could a 30-year-old woman really go back to school? The thought sparked both exhilaration and dread. Yet every fibre of my being, every suppressed dream from childhood yearned to say yes. I enrolled that fall, attending classes 3 evenings a week at the community college. My classmates ranged from a young father learning English to a retired Navy veteran brushing up on math. I felt awkward among them, grasping at algebraic formulas, long forgotten, stumbling over grammar rules I'd never learned. There were nights when I cried over my textbooks, convinced I was too old, too broken. But each morning I returned fueled by Marina's proud smile and Mrs. Solis's wave from across the hall. I discovered study groups in the library tutors who offered free sessions in writing and a Pell Grant that covered tuition. Slowly, the letters and numbers grew familiar again. When I passed my first proficiency test, I wept in the bathroom stall, hands shaking. That night, I called Rachel to say I did it, Rachel. I'm not stupid. By 1993, at 36, I walked across the graduation stage with my diploma in hand. Marina, then 16, cheered louder than anyone. The applause felt like redemption. At graduation, I surprised even myself by announcing to my advisor I want to keep going. She smiled and handed me a brochure for the associate degree in social work. The idea resonated: who better to serve battered women than someone who had lived it? I applied for a scholarship aimed at survivors of domestic violence. When the acceptance letter arrived, I cancelled my disbelief and enrolled full-time. Days blurred into lectures on human behavior case management and legal advocacy. I juggled part-time shifts at the motel night classes and early morning study sessions. Fatigue was constant, an ache beneath my ribs. Yet every definition I learned, trauma-informed care empowerment model. Crisis intervention lit a flame inside me. Internship placements led me back to the Women's Resource Centre, this time as a trainee. I sat beside new arrivals, helping fill out intake forms and explaining their rights under California law. When a frightened mother asked, "Can they really keep him away?" I answered, "Yes, and we will help you file the papers." I realized then that knowledge is power, and power can protect lives. Graduation from the college program brought a job offer at the very center where I'd found refuge. As a case manager, I guided women through the maze of court orders, housing applications, and financial planning. I watched mothers regain custody of their children, teenagers learn to trust again, and families rebuild. Each victory felt personal, as though I were stitching together not only their broken wings, but my own. Outside work, I joined a peer-led advocacy group that met monthly to lobby for stronger protections for domestic violence survivors. We wrote letters to state representatives, shared native insights into what legal reforms truly meant, and celebrated small legislative wins, like funding for emergency shelters and legal aid. Standing at the Capitol in Sacramento with a group of fellow survivors, I understood that my story had become part of something larger, a movement for justice and dignity. Years later, I would look back on my journey and realize that the hardest teacher was fear itself. Fear had been my jailer, then my fuel. It taught me caution, but also unexpectedly courage. I used that courage to open doors for myself and then to swing them wide for others. Marina grew into a strong, compassionate woman who entered education herself, inspired by the transformation she'd witnessed in her mother. She once told me, "You taught me to see the cracks in the concrete and to grow through them." I recognized then that the seed of freedom I planted under that Oakland cabinet had sprouted into a forest of possibilities. Today, as I share this from my porch in Monterey, coffee cup in hand, knitting needles clicking in my lap, I feel the full arc of my journey from a small house where safety meant invisibility to a life built on visibility, on voice, and on choice. Healing didn't come all at once. It arrived in support group circles, in diplomas earned at night, in every frightened woman who found her way back to strength. In Part 4, we'll explore how to sustain that strength, long-term, transforming post-traumatic growth into lasting resilience, continuing education at any age, and leveraging community advocacy to create systemic change. Because true freedom is not a moment, but a lifelong journey, and the next steps often start with a single act of self-belief. When I began work as a case manager at the Women's Resource Center, I thought my journey had reached its pinnacle. I was guiding clients through courtrooms, where I once trembled translating legal jargon into plain English, and celebrating with mothers who finally saw their children smile again. But I soon learned that healing and growth aren't finish lines. They're ongoing processes, like tending a garden that never truly blooms all at once. In my first year on the job, I attended a conference in Los Angeles called Emerging from the Shadows. The keynote speaker was Dr. Eleanor Ruiz, a psychologist who coined the term post-traumatic growth to describe how adversity can fuel positive transformation. She told us that survivors often discover new strengths, forge deeper relationships, and develop a renewed appreciation for life. On the flight home, I journaled Dr. Ruiz's 5 pillars of growth personal strength, recognizing I survived this. New possibilities, dreaming of paths once closed, relating to others, forging authentic connections, appreciation of life, savoring each sunrise, spiritual change, finding meaning beyond pain. I realized I had only tapped the first personal strength. Yes, I'd endured, but I hadn't yet fully explored new possibilities. My world remained focused on domestic violence work, as vital as that was. But what about the seed of storytelling I'd once loved as a child? What about my unspoken dream to teach future advocates? Fear still whispered that I wasn't qualified, wasn't credible enough. But now I knew fear could be my compass. Wherever it pointed, that was where I needed to grow. At 44, with my social work degree well behind me, I found myself eyeing a flyer for a certificate in trauma-informed leadership at the local university. The program was geared toward those managing non-profits, offering courses in organizational development and grant writing. My heart pounded, Could a middle-aged woman juggling work and family really handle more homework? My first no was automatic. Then I remembered Dr. Rui's fear signals growth. I applied. The acceptance letter arrived on a grey Wednesday. I wept at my desk, overwhelmed by gratitude and doubt. I balanced my caseload with 2 evening classes and weekend group projects. My twin goals: learn to lead my center more effectively and position myself to train other advocates across California. The coursework stretched me. In grant proposal writing, I wrestled with budget spreadsheets. In organizational culture, I studied leadership styles I'd only observed by trial and error. In ethical advocacy, we debated client confidentiality versus community transparency. Each assignment was a mirror, reflecting both my strengths and my blind spots. By the time I completed the certificate at 46, I was co-leading the center's board meetings, securing state funding for our emergency shelter, and mentoring younger staff. More importantly, I internalized a vital lesson. Education isn't a young person's race, it's a lifelong journey. Every new credential doesn't replace who I was. It amplifies my ability to serve. As I stepped into leadership roles, I felt a pull to mentor emerging professionals. I started a monthly peer-to-peer lunch at the center, inviting interns and new hires to ask candid questions over turkey sandwiches and fruit salad. My rule was simple: no question too small, no mistake too shameful to discuss. One afternoon, a fresh-faced intern named Tasha confessed she dreaded court hearings, terrified of speaking up for clients. I saw my younger self in her, paralyzed by doubt. I shared my first courtroom experience, how my legs shook, my throat closed. Then I walked her through the exercises I used, scripting key points, practicing them aloud, then visualizing success. When the next court date arrived, Tasha whispered, "I did it," after securing a temporary protective order for a terrified mother. Those moments crystallized my purpose. My story wasn't an endpoint, but a bridge. By mentoring others, I multiplied my impact far beyond the walls of any single shelter. Each advocate I nurtured would go on to help dozens, maybe hundreds more. In 2005, I joined San Diego's Domestic Violence Advisory Council, a coalition of survivors, service providers, and policymakers. We met monthly in City Hall, drafting proposals for funding, revising shelter regulations, and advising the district attorney's office on sensitivity training for prosecutors. One proposal I spearheaded was the Safe Steps Ordinance, requiring hotels and motels to post hotline numbers in discreet locations, laundry rooms under bed frames inside hairdryers. To gather data, I led a small survey of motel employees, discovering that over 60% had unknowingly hosted guests in flight from violence. Sharing those numbers with city council members, I witnessed the power of concrete evidence. When Safe Steps passed, I stood with city leaders at the podium, reading a letter from a mother who'd saved her daughter's life by spotting the hotline under a towel rack. Looking out at the audience, policymakers, survivors, hotel managers, I knew that systemic change wasn't abstract legislation. It was a lifeline extended into every room where fear once reigned. Around the same time, an editor from a national non-profit newsletter invited me to write an article, From Prisoner to Advocate, A Journey of Healing. I hesitated. Writing was a solitary task, and I feared judgment. But each time I opened a blank page, I felt the tug of the child who once lost herself in library books. Over weeks, I drafted and redrafted, weaving stories of Zoe's Sunday circle, of the bus ride to San Diego, of the moment I realized I had a voice worth sharing. When the article published, I received emails from women in Maine, Texas, and even Alaska, thanking me for putting words to experiences they thought isolated. One reader wrote, "Your story helped me see that leaving is possible." Another confessed she'd kept her children quiet about bedtime screams until she recognized her daughter's trauma mirrored Marina's. A year later, I delivered my first keynote speech at a statewide DV conference. Standing at the lectern, I felt my pulse race, but I spoke through a steady calm I had learned to summon. As I shared strategies for safe exits and community building, I watched hundreds nod in solidarity. In that moment, I understood that storytelling can be as vital as policy stories build bridges between hearts and laws. By my 50th birthday, life's rhythm included grant reports, staff supervision, and conference travel. But I knew burnout was a constant risk. I developed personal rituals to sustain resilience. Daily mindfulness. Each morning, I spent 5 minutes seated by my bay window garden, focusing on the scent of lavender and the distant hum of traffic. Just 5 breaths of intentional calm prepared me for whatever lay ahead. Monthly retreats. I carved out one weekend a month. No phones, no work either at a friend's cabin in Julian or on a solo drive along the Pacific Coast Highway. During those retreats, I journaled painted watercolors and let my mind wander beyond agendas and case files. Peer supervision group. I joined a confidential circle of fellow leaders, meeting bi-weekly to discuss ethical dilemmas, share self-care tips, and hold each other accountable. Knowing I had a safe space to offload worries saved me from carrying every burden alone. These practices reminded me that to help others, I needed my own emotional bank account to be healthy. Just as flight attendants instruct us to secure our own oxygen masks before assisting others, I learned that self-care wasn't selfish, it was essential. In 2012, I hired a young woman named Angela to take over my caseload so I could focus on program development. On her first day, I shared my trademark advice. Don't be afraid to ask the loud questions, and don't ever apologize for saving a life. Over the years, Angela rose through the ranks and now directs emergency shelter operations in San Diego County. At her inauguration, she credited me for teaching her to see survivors not as victims, but as experts of their own stories. Passing the torch wasn't just a leadership move, it was an act of hope. It meant that the work I began in a tiny East Oakland cabinet drawer had grown roots deep enough to sustain beyond my tenure. As I settled into semi-retirement consulting for other shelters and teaching workshops at the university, I realized my life had assumed layers I never foresaw. The frightened girl who once shivered at her own reflection became a mentor, an architect of policy, a storyteller whose words traveled across states. In reflection, I understood the continuum of resilience. Survival, escaping the immediate threat. Stabilization, securing housing income safety. Reclamation, reclaiming identity through education and vocation. Growth, expanding leadership advocacy storytelling. Legacy, mentoring successors and shaping systemic change. Today, when I walk through the halls of the center I helped build, I see walls adorned with photos. First graduates of our diploma program, shelter residents, celebrating birthdays, legislative victories, captured in press clippings. Each image is a testament to what sustained collective effort can achieve. My journey taught me that healing and empowerment aren't singular events, but lifelong work. Trauma can leave scars, but those scars can guide us toward empathy, wisdom, and purpose. Each step from bucketed coins under a cabinet to statewide policy reform was fueled by a simple truth. When a woman claims her right to live freely, she changes not only her own world, but the world around her. In Part 5, we'll bring these lessons home with practical guidance how to maintain self-care in the long run, build networks of mutual aid, and keep advocating for those whose voices are still waiting to be heard. Because each of us in our own way can help the next Janet find her way to the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, ready to tell her story.